I'm recording it. And if you have any questions, please ask. But if you'd rather not ask, oh, someone else is here. Look at that. If you'd rather not ask in front of everyone, and because it's being recorded, we can have a chat later. That's absolutely fine. Okay. Cool. Who else is here? Zoe. Hello, Zoe.
Hello.
So Zoe, I'm just recording this, and I don't know if you heard me saying to Mel, I'm going to, if you've got questions and you want to ask in front of everyone, there's just 3 of us, but it's going to be sent to everyone else who is on the mailing list too. But if you'd rather not ask while it's being recorded, we'll just stick around and have a chat later. So it's totally up to you. Okay, can you both see the screen? It doesn't matter too much if you can't. I'm just going to be talking away. So it is so super common to experience any type of leakage, especially as a mum. So about 65% of mums experience some sort of leakage. And it doesn't mean that you have to empty your whole bowels. That happens as well, bladder, to be incontinent. It can go anywhere from just a few drops, like some leakage, to maybe emptying your whole bladder. So it varies for different people too. There's 2 major types of, can you guys see me, by the way, or can you just see the screen?
I can see you, but I can see both.
Oh, okay. So I will carry on with my hands. I'm doing all this. I'm like, I don't even know if people can see me. I can't see me. So there's 2 major types of leakage. You've got stress leakage and urge leakage. So, and you can also have both as well. So it's not necessarily you fit into both categories. You could experience both. So stress leakage is when you've got your pelvic floor sits at the bottom of your pelvis. And there's more than 2 functions to your pelvic floor, but in terms of kind of holding in a wee, your pelvic floor can support your bladder. So as that bladder gets full, it kind of supports the bladder and stops it from sloshing around everywhere. And then it also has a sphincter effect as well. So if we think about needing to support this big balloon full of liquid in our bladder, in our intra-abdominal cavity, and squeezing it, that is the job of the pelvic floor. But after we've pushed something the size of a watermelon through our vagina and pelvic floor, that might be a little bit loose from there on. So if you think about any extra stress that's going down onto that pelvic floor, that is when we get stress leakage. And it varies for people. Like I said, you could have a few drops. that's my dropper action. You can have a few drops of leakage, or it could be a whole bladder, anywhere in between. It just varies for different people. And it doesn't always have to be the jumping exercises as well. So kind of coughing, sneezing, jumping is quite common for people. But if you like to lift big weights in the gym, if you imagine yourself with a barbell on your back and it's like 100 kilos, and you're, just an example, you don't have to squat 100 kilos, but if you're squatting and that opens then up your pelvic floor and your pelvis at the bottom of the squat, you've created that intra-abdominal pressure. And if your pelvic floor can't control that pressure, if you look at that downward arrow, that pressure, that is also when you're going to get incontinence and a bit of leaking. So that's kind of the mechanics of how that happens. My first piece of advice for people is it's not always about doing kegals. So if you think that you've got a weak pelvic floor because you're leaking a bit of urine, it's not actually always the case. So what you could have is you either have a weakened pelvic floor, means a pelvic floor that's not functioning properly. And that can either be because it's too loose from having children, or it's too tight. So sometimes you might have a hypertonic pelvic floor. Now, either of those, so an overactive or a tight pelvic floor isn't a strong pelvic floor. It just means it's not functioning as it should. So therefore it's weak. So doing extra kegals, like hundreds of kegals a day, is not going to help an extra tight pelvic floor. So you should go see a women's health physio, because they will always help you to, 1, figure out what's going on with your pelvic floor, and then 2, get to the cause of what's causing the leakage. Is it stress incontinence? Is it urge incontinence? Is it both? So that's always my first port of call. Go see women's health physio, rather than going away and thinking, I need to do hundreds of kegals to strengthen my pelvic floor, because you could actually be making it worse, or maybe just not doing your kegals correctly. So there's so many different layers and elements to it, and you could avoid all of the confusion and the trial and error just by going to see a women's health physio. At the end, I'll give out the team that I work with here in Gosford. They are just beautiful ladies. They're so nice. So I'll give out their details if anyone wants them later. Mel, I know you're in a meeting room, so you could try this now, but I'm going to take you through pelvic floor engagement. So I don't know if you're in a position to, not physical position, but I don't know if you're able to just sit there and try some pelvic floor lifts. So what I do with my clients, usually we're lying down, but I won't get you to lie down. You can do it sitting down. Just make sure that your knees are hip width apart and your feet are also hip width apart as well. So as you sit on the chair, just make sure the weight is even going down through your seat bones, not kind of to one side or the other. As you breathe in, just make sure your tummy muscles are nice and relaxed. So you want to breathe in with a big relaxed tummy. I know it goes against everything that you feel that you should be out in public. You always want to suck your tummy in, but as you breathe in, just let the tummy muscles relax. Now, as you breathe out, I want you to engage your pelvic floor by imagining that you've got a tampon in, you're squeezing a tampon and you're lifting. And then you release the tampon and lower. So you lower the tampon and just open and relax again. So as you breathe in, everything is relaxed. As you breathe out, squeeze and lift that tampon. And then as you breathe in again, you relax. So that is kind of your pelvic floor lift. Your bum cheeks should be nice and relaxed. You shouldn't be able to see anything because it's an internal muscle. And it's the same muscles that kind of stop the flow of urine if you're trying to, like holding a pee, it's those muscles. So that is your pelvic floor lifting and releasing. If you go see your women's health physio, they'll be able to say whether you're doing it correctly, how much strength you have in your pelvic floor. So that just kind of eliminates all the confusion over that. Next piece of advice for stress incontinence. So remember, stress incontinence is that extra pressure down on the pelvic floor and having a bit of leakage from that, is where you are in your menstrual cycle. So as probably the week before you have your period, your estrogen levels drop, and that can cause the tissue, especially your pelvic floor, so all that tissue and fascia around your pelvic floor, to just loosen a little bit more. And this is the same effect that we get when we hit menopause, or lead into menopause, probably don't hit it. Your estrogen levels drop, and that's why we need to fix these issues now before we get to menopause, because menopause does not help leakage, because that drop in estrogen just kind of lets that fascia and tissue just relax. So if you're exercising and you know it's the week leading up to your period, just kind of be mindful that you might be a bit more prone to leakage. So maybe reduce the weight that you're lifting, maybe reduce the impact that you're doing, maybe avoid high intensity interval training if you love that usually, and just go for maybe a gentle core workout that's going to strengthen your deep abdominals, strengthen your pelvic floor, and then get back to it when you feel able to. So that's also one way kind of around a stress incontinence. Does anyone have any questions about jumping up and down, leaking, anything like that?
Not at the moment.
Not
awesome. Not yet. Okay, so the other type of leakage that I was talking about was called urge leakage, or an overactive bladder. I reckon 100% of mums can definitely relate to this. So it often starts when we're quite young, because you know when you probably do this with your kids as well. I do with mine, but I'm very mindful of it now. You're about to leave the house and you're going on maybe a half an hour car journey, and you're like, just go to the toilet, go and have a wee in case you need the toilet while we're in the car. And it's all those just in case wees that start to tell your bladder to empty before it's full. So then every time your bladder maybe gets halfway full, it sends a signal to the brain to say, you need to go to the toilet. And we get into this cycle starting from a very young age to needing to go to the toilet when our bladder is only halfway full. And then we become mums and you're up 4 or 5 times during the night. I don't know about you, but me, I'd probably go to the toilet when my babies were little every time I was up, because I'm like, well, I'm awake. I think I might need the toilet. Will I actually go back to sleep if I need the toilet? Or maybe you're breastfeeding, you're like, I could be here for hours. I'm going to go to the toilet just in case. So you go through motherhood, and that does not help having an overactive bladder either. So it's all about helping teach your bladder to get full before it starts to contract and push the urine back out. So that's what happens really. Your bladder starts to fill up, and then the bladder contracts, and it's that contraction and then that then pushes the urine out. So we want to start telling the brain, don't tell my bladder to contract yet, because it's not full. So much easier said than done. So I hate to be boring and repetitive, but the first port of call really is to go and see women's health physio, simply because they will be able to tell you whether you have urge incontinence, stress incontinence, both, or maybe look into it a bit more. Maybe there are other things with your posture. So what you can sometimes find as well, if you're standing with a tilt in your pelvis, so if your pelvis is tilting at a certain angle, you've then put your pelvic floor out of line from your rib cage, and that doesn't help support your bladder or your pelvic floor. So it might even be a case of just changing the way that you stand to help with leakage. Or they might say, yes, it's a case of bladder retraining, let's do that. So a second tip you can do to help with urge leakage is just to breathe and don't stress. I don't know about you guys, but have you ever you've been desperate for the toilet, but you think you can hold on. You go to get your keys out your pocket or your bag, and suddenly you're like, oh my God, I'm going to wet myself if I do not get into my house quick enough. And it's that trigger of sometimes just taking your keys out. Your brain goes, okay, we're nearly at the toilet, tells your bladder, and your bladder starts contracting. So it's just trying to breathe through it. Don't stress. Try not to think about it as you're opening your front door, and then slowly walking to the bathroom. So much easier said than done, I know. But when you can start to think about these things a bit more, you can start to help break the cycle. Another awesome tip that my women's health physio told me is to scrunch up your toes or do calf raises on your toes when you feel that you need the toilet. So obviously, if your bladder is full to bursting, you need to go to the toilet. If it's only halfway full, then that's when we can kind of try to put it off a bit and slowly walk to the bathroom and make sure we could fill our bladder a little bit more before we empty it. So by scrunching your toes and lifting your heels up and down, you've got a nerve that goes from your ankle, runs up your leg, through the pelvis and up to your brain. So you're kind of switching up the signals that nerve is sending the brain. And when my women's health physio told me, I was like, whatever, there's no way that's going to work. It does. It's awesome. And obviously, like, you still need the toilet, but it kind of gives you a few more seconds to tell your brain everything's okay, the bladder's not full, let's go to the toilet slowly. So let's walk there slowly. Just calming down and walking slowly. Avoiding certain, oh, you're gonna hate me for this. So avoiding certain food and drinks that irritate the bladder. It's all the good stuff: caffeine, alcohol, chocolate, spicy food. It is different for everyone. So I know for me, one of my triggers for needing the toilet a lot is caffeine and wine, which is a real pain in the bum. And I don't think any women's health physio would ever tell you to avoid them, because that's just depressing. But just be aware of them. So maybe if you have 2 coffees in the morning, you limit it to 1 coffee, and then you have your other coffee in the afternoon. So just kind of spacing it out. Or if you have a glass of wine, follow it up with a glass of water. Just little things like that. Or maybe avoiding wine with spicy food followed by a coffee. So you just have to kind of think of what's an irritant for you, and then how you can kind of work that around your life. Or just knowing that maybe if you're going on a long car journey, don't have a coffee beforehand. Well, just little things. Everyone's different, and you just have to make it work for you. So it sounds strange because we're talking about trying to stop leaking, but you need to drink enough water as well. It actually does the opposite. So when you drink enough water, you're diluting the strength of the urine in your bladder. So another bladder irritant is actually strong, concentrated urine. So if you're drinking enough water, it can just dilute that a little bit, and it stops the bladder from having that contraction when it's only half full. So you could actually get a full bladder by drinking enough water, being able to hold it, and then go to the toilet when you need to empty it. It's all very strange, I know. And I will talk a little bit about poo because we're mums and that's what we do. But avoiding constipation is a really good way to avoid leaking as well, especially if you're exercising. So do you remember at first I was talking about that intra-abdominal pressure, that pushing down that we get on, oh, my papers are blown away. Well, that pressure that we get when we squat or jump and stuff. If you think about if you're constipated, that takes up extra room in your abdominal cavity. So that's just adding extra pressure. So if you can kind of find out what foods maybe block you up if that's something you experience, or find foods that help you go to the toilet a bit better, then definitely look into your diet as well. Not everyone experiences constipation, and that might not be one of the symptoms for you, but if it is, that's also a good way to avoid leakage. It's not a very glamorous thing to talk about, I know, but very very useful, hopefully. So that's kind of it for the ins and the outs. I'm just going to close my screen now. Did that make sense? I feel like I've thrown so much information at you, but have you got any questions?
Do you know how much liquid an average bladder holds?
Oh, yes, good question. I did mean to tell you that. So it should be about a cup of sounds delicious. A cup of urine. you should release kind of a cup every time you go to the toilet.
Okay.
And I don't expect everyone to go take a cup or a measuring jug with them to the bathroom, but it's probably about an 8-second wee. Mm-hmm. Depends how fast you wee, I know. Excuse me. Sitting. So it's about 8 seconds.
Yeah, okay.
And you should probably go about 6 to 8 times a day, maybe once through the night. So yeah, excuse me. Oh,
you okay?
Oh, and I'm just going to get a glass of water. Are there any other questions while I'm dying here?
Oh no, you sound terrible.
Oh, you know when it really just gets you? Literally just choked on air.
Oh no, you've lost your voice and everything.
Literally just happened in seconds.
Oh.
Good. Oh my gosh. Okay. If anyone has any other questions, do you want to type them out? But you can email. Oh my goodness, the poor people who are going to watch this back later. They'll be like, that lady is just dying. Okay.
I'm going to type one.
That is absolutely fine. You can't ask, but I do understand that people are around. That's fine. Oh, I get to have a look. Oh yes, so with a prolapsed bladder, surgery, I would say, is probably the last resort. Especially, has there been any mention of mesh or anything, Mel? Or has everyone said avoid mesh?
So my specialist won't do that because, yeah, the mesh has been recalled.
Good. There are still a few people out there who...
There are people that still do it. Yeah, I'm
don't.
just trying to do everything else that I can.
Yep. And have you seen a women's health physio about a pessary?
No.
So that is another option.
Right.
So with a prolapsed bladder, so as I'm sure you know, it's when the bladder can kind of push into the vaginal canal. And so that is definitely going to be affected or affect your leaking.
Yeah.
Just because of the extra pressure that it puts on, and your pelvic floor just really struggles to hold in that urine. One, you need to be really careful of the type of exercises that you're doing. Big wide squats that help to open up your pelvis and your pelvic floor are definitely not great for you, because you're not giving that structure and that support to your pelvic floor. So if you're into your I don't know if you exercise at the moment, but you want to avoid those really wide stances, as well as lots of jumping and high impact exercises, just because you're trying to re-strengthen the walls of the vagina and the pelvic floor to hold up that prolapse, and any extra pressure and bouncing or stretching is definitely not going to help. So a pessary is kind of like a support that you use to just prop it up. So it could either be, there's different kind of uses for it. You could use it to help re-strengthen the pelvic floor, and then eventually you don't need it anymore. Or it could be something that you excuse me, you're taught to insert before you exercise or before you do something. Oh my goodness. So yeah, so I would do you see a gynecologist at the moment?
Yeah.
For that. I would have thought they'd maybe mention it, but you could go and see a women's health physio anyway, because they're kind of more on the being active and sporty side to it as well. So they're more about rehabilitation over treatment. And I just think it's always worth it. Like it's their job to kind of say, okay, so let's see how you move and how can we kind of help you with that. Yeah, I'll send you the women's health physios that I work with if you're
that'd
interested.
be great. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah,
yes. I've never done that, so that would be really good. Yeah.
They may also check other things as well, like the strength of your pelvic floor and what effect that can have on your rehab. Maybe strengthening that could actually help with the prolapse.
Yeah. Okay.
So there are definitely exercises. Everyone is so different, and it depends on the degree of prolapse as well. But there are definitely exercises that you can do that help to reduce and eventually eliminate prolapse. So that's kind of partly what I do as well in my classes. It's all about working around various birth injuries and then re-strengthening the body and rehabilitating it through exercise.
Right. Okay.
But good question.
Okay. Can I ask, are all your classes outdoors, or do you do gym sessions?
No, they're all outdoors.
They're all outdoors.
Which was freezing this morning. It was so cold. It's lovely in the summer. It's a bit cold sometimes in the winter. And when it rains, we used to use an indoor hall at a dance studio, but COVID's kind of put a stop to that. So we do virtual instead.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
right,
but it is
cool.
nice. I don't know, now we're kind of going through COVID crisis. It's kind of nice having outdoor sessions. It doesn't feel like the germs will get you, except for mine, no. Although it does feel like a dry throat, not COVID. Are there any other questions? Can I help with anything else, even if it's not related to experiencing leakage when you exercise?
I don't have any other questions, but I love all your tips that you give on
Facebook. Thanks.
Yeah, they're really useful. Thanks. They're really good.
That's good to know. I'm glad someone looks at them.
Yeah, heaps.
Thanks, Zoe. All right then, guys. So I'm going to send out the recording in a bit, so you will get that, and then everyone else will get it too. And then there'll be a few extra bits coming your way too.
Okay, great.
Thanks for joining me, lovely ladies. It was so nice to meet you.
You too.
Thanks for putting up with my coughing fit as well. Actually, though, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to hang up on everyone and just die slowly in the corner.
I'm glad it stopped.
Me too. Yeah. See, it's all that pelvic floor work that helped.
All right.
All right. Bye, lovely ladies. Enjoy your afternoon. See you.
You too. Bye.